Hello, everybody. I am Saumendra Nath, but always love to be called as Saumendra. If home is the place where people must take you in, if you go there, then India is my home. Nevertheless, I work as an international civil servant at the United Nations in New York and currently live in this great city with rich heritage and most iconic skyline of the world. I'm a seasoned public sector governance professional, having worked at several large scale and complex federal government and international organizations around the world. I've been conferred with a PhD by St. John's University in 2020. My research interests revolve around the impact of demographics in the equity of global education. With that brief introduction, let me share my research work with you. So my research work was on the connections between parental marital status, parental involvement, and literacy achievement of kindergarten children. Now, the research problem was as follows. The family structure has evolved over the years. The unprecedented technological progress and globalization have transcended human lives. Technology has undoubtedly brought us closer, but created distance in our relationships. Children are increasingly growing up with single parents and non-biological parents. According to the United States Census Bureau's population survey of 2018, there were around 35.7 million single parent households, comprising of around 28% of all households in the United States. That's an alarming number. And increasingly, social scientists and psychologists are deeply concerned with the fragile families and its impact on the well-being of the children. The current study examined how fragile families were associated with the parental involvement and literacy achievement of children. For the purpose of this study, the fragile families were defined as those families where the children were devoid of living in households with both the biological parents. There are mainly two research questions. The first one was, what is the relationship between parental marital status and kindergarten children's reading scores? The second question was, does parental involvement mediate the association between parent marital status and kindergarten children's reading scores? The theoretical framework of the study was situated on the premise of social and human capital. As we all know, Coleman's social capital theory indicated that household relations affected the transmission of human and social capital to the children. Social and human capital theory helped to understand how parental relationship, which is social capital, affected the educational outcome, which is the human capital of the children. Now, why did I study this? As I mentioned before, the social scientists are increasingly concerned with the diminishing role of family and imminent decline of parental involvement in child's education. The issue of parents' marital status, socioeconomic status, and academic performance of students have been looked previously also, but they were generally investigated in isolation from one another. The special feature of my study was to look together into the connections between parental marital status, parental involvement, and academic outcomes of the students. Another special attribute of my study was to examine the complex interplays of demographics on these variables. Now, this was basically the conceptual framework of the study. In my study, I have tried to see the direct impact of the parental marital status on the children's reading outcomes, and then the impact of parental marital status on the parental involvement, which in turn impacted the children's reading outcomes. And all these direct and indirect relationships, I've tried to examine the impact of various demographics on these variables. And the demographics include the gender, age, racial origin, location of the schools, etc., etc. Now, for the current study, I have used the ECLSK 2011 data from the baseline cohort comprising of kindergarteners from 90-70 schools in the United States in 2010-11. The ECLSK 2011 data set was developed by the National Center for Education Statistics, which is the primary federal entity for collecting, analyzing, and reporting data related to education in the United States. The data set was exceptionally broad in coverage and designed to provide a comprehensive and reliable data on children's learning experiences in the United States. I've also used the Taylor series method to weight the sampled data in order to produce the estimates that were representative of the kindergarten cohort of children in 2010-11. When I'll be discussing the results, you will see that mostly the results were based on the were based on around 15,000, to be specific, 15,827 students. But the population of the cohort was around 4 million. So in order to provide an estimate of the kindergarten children who are representative of the total population in the cohort of 2010-11, I have used the Taylor series method and used the weight for my analysis. To answer the first research question, what is the relationship between parental marital relationship status and kindergarten children's literacy scores? As I mentioned before, I've used the weighted simultaneous multiple regression analysis. I've used the diverse demographic of students as covariates in the same model. I've conducted Lewin's test for homogeneity, and the post hoc test was also conducted for comparing the group means of the literacy scores of children coming from different household types. Meaning that households comprising of both biological parents, and households comprising of single parent, households comprising of non-biological parents, and households comprising of children who are living with only one biological mother or father who is cohabiting with a partner. And now to answer the second research question, does parental involvement mediate the association between parental marital relationship and kindergarten children's literacy scores? I have basically conducted two multiple regression analyses. The first one was if marital status was predicting the parental involvement, and the second one was whether parental involvement predicted the children's literacy scores. I've also conducted the mediation analysis using Hayes process and bootstrapping method. The principal advantage of using Hayes process with bootstrapping was its robust computational power to perform the regression routines and explicit quantification of the indirect effect. The R-square statistics, of course, was also computed to see the effect size and significant testing at p less than 0.05. Some of the salient points as far as the methodology of this research was conducted was like below. Missing values were substituted by multiple imputation. 5 iterations were done on 5 sets of imputation. Composite variables were created to find out parental involvement for both home-based and school-based engagement of parents. And of course, weighting was done by using the Taylor series method by identifying full sampling weight, straight-up identifier, and PSU variables. With that, let me now share the results of my study. So as I mentioned before, the research question 1 was on the association between parental marital status and the children's reading scores. And in order to examine that research question, I've used this model. Basically, there are 3 models, and we'll discuss all of them in the following slides. In the first model, I've tried to examine if parental marital status predicted the children's outcomes, and what was the impact of socioeconomic status and various demographics like gender, age, racial origin of the students on these variables, namely the parental marital status and children's reading outcomes. And the results indicated a statistically significant relation between parental marital status and children's reading outcomes. In fact, the reading scores were significantly negatively correlated for children living with single parents and other guardians compared to the children with two parents. In other words, the children living with both biological parents fared well than their other counterparts who were not living with both biological parents. This was the result of the post hoc test. So if you see the mean score, the mean literacy scores of children living in different household types, you'll be able to see that the mean score was highest when the children were living with both biological parents, and all of them were statistically significant. All the group means were statistically significant, significantly different from each other. Now, to answer the research question 2, which was to determine whether parental involvement influenced the relationship between parental marital status and children in scores, I have used basically two models. The first model was to examine if parental marital status impacted the parental involvement, and in the later model, I will show you that whether the parental involvement was impacting the children's literacy scores. And interestingly, in both the cases, I found a statistically significant relationship. The parental involvement was significantly negatively correlated for one biological parents and a partner, and with non-biological parents compared to intact households with two parents. Again, which means that the parental involvement was higher when the children were living in intact households with two biological parents. But there was an interesting finding. Uh, there was a statistically significant positive correlation between single parents and parental involvement when all the covariates were taken into account. The covariates means all the demographics were taken into account, like socioeconomic status, racial origin, um, the location of the schools, age, gender. When all these variables all these demographics and were taken as covariates, then the results indicated that the parental involvement was better in case of single parents, which is a very significant finding. This suggested that if family and environmental context, including race, ethnicity, language, and socioeconomic status, did not create an impediment, perhaps single parents devoted more time and efforts in children's learning experiences. Of course, there are differential impact of demographics and parental involvement also. In model number 3, I've tried to find out how the parental involvement was associated with the children's reading scores. And again, there was a statistically significant positive correlation between home-based parental involvement and reading scores. However, there was no statistically significant correlation between school-based parental involvement and reading scores, which implies that home-based parental involvement perhaps is more important than the school-based parental involvement. Finally, I have conducted a mediation analysis using the Hayes process and bootstrapping method in order to determine the indirect effect of parental involvement. And as you can see from the model, that there was a statistically significant correlation between parental marital status and parental involvement. There was a statistically significant relation between parental involvement and children reading scores. There was also a statistically significant correlation between parental marital status and children reading scores. And most importantly, there was a statistically significant mediating effect of parental involvement on the association between parental marital status and children reading scores. Meaning that there was an indirect effect of parental involvement on the relationship between the parental marital status and children's reading scores. Now, what revealed from the results? Children had better reading scores when they lived in intact households with both biological parents. The lowest reading scores were associated with children coming from households where no biological parents were present. So there are two extreme. One is children were always doing better when they live in intact houses. Children was always performing. Their performance was the lowest when they were coming from the households with no biological parents. Parental involvement, also likewise for children living with two biological parents, were higher compared to their peers living with one parent and a partner and non-biological parents. There was enhanced parental involvement for children with single parents when the demographics were taken into account. This was a very interesting finding, and this suggested that the relation between parental marital status and parental involvement is complex and multifaceted. It cannot be simply construed that two parents are always better under all situational context. And this is quite a revelation. The demographics have differential impact on children's reading scores. The more the parental involvement, the higher the ACS, the higher the socioeconomic status, the more is the parental involvement and the reading scores. Finally, the study results indicated that the parental involvement statistically significantly mediated the association between parental marital status and reading achievement, meaning that the parental marital status influenced the parental involvement, which in turn influenced the literacy scores of the kindergarten children. And there were, of course, some limitation in this research. This was a non-experimental research. As I've mentioned before, that I've used the ECLSK data set for examining all these relationships among different variables of interest, but this was not an experimental study. Experimental studies in the future would allow establishing cause and effect relationship. The current study focused only on the kindergarten children. Future studies might consider children of higher grades to better generalize the correlations. But the study, of course, has a very good future implication. It will definitely contribute to the existing literature. Most importantly, the current study, as I mentioned before, had posed a fundamental challenge, a challenge to the fundamental belief that two parents are always better. The enhanced parental involvement by single parents showed that the association between family structure and children's outcomes cannot be studied in isolation from other demographic factors. Demographics has, of course, a great impact on the equity of education. This would prompt future researchers to investigate if the gaps in parental involvement and students' literacy outcomes are explained by demographic differences between one and two parent families. The importance of the study lies in its contribution to inform the policy on practice, on the nuances of the fragile family relations, and its complex interplays with demographics and academic outcomes of the children. The study would also help the educators and policymakers to adopt appropriate pedagogical approaches aimed at advancing the educational equity and closing the achievement gaps of children from diverse families. With that, I've come to an end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And at last, I'd like to say that no research work is complete. The eminence of one work opens the door for a better work. I'm deeply concerned with the growing imbalance in the equity of global education and intensely intend to do some more work in this area. I remain open to any criticism and any suggestions on this that may provide the much needed impetus to carry forward my work in the continuum of my tireless efforts to serve the people and planet. Thank you very much for listening. And once again, I remain open to any criticism and suggestions. Thank you.